Hi, I'm Lauren Young. Welcome to Reuters Next. Today we're going to be talking about the role of the private sector in the refugee crisis, and I have a distinguished panel who I'm going to introduce. I'll go all the way to the end. Monna Kashfi. Monna, her official title is Vice President of Content and Communications at Welcome US. Thank you so much for joining us. Yaron Schwartz. I'm trying to use my best accent there, Yaron. Yaron, your official title is Director for the US at Tent. And then finally, a last-minute guest. Thank you so much, Nishant Roy, for joining us from Chobani. I'm a huge yogurt fan, and you do corporate communications. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So I'm a little familiar with the Chobani story and how it integrates into the community of refugees here in the U.S. And it's important to say that we are going to be talking about legal immigration here. There's a whole other aspect to what's going on in the immigration world. But if you could talk a little bit about because you are the private partner, how it's helped your company.
Sure. And Lauren, thank you and Reuters for having us and giving us this opportunity to go tell the story. This is not out of the goodness of our heart to go and hire refugees. We made a thoughtful decision, I think, in the early days of founding the business. We had fully employed all of the folks in Norwich, New York, went to neighboring towns and found that there was a big diaspora of refugees that happened to be in Utica that were looking for work. And we weren't quite sure how we were going to get folks to come to the plant. We weren't sure if they were going to speak the language, and we weren't sure how they were going to operate in a manufacturing environment. So we set out and trained folks. We got buses, and then we separately got translators, and now have since innovated to get technology into it. The business has only continued to grow as a function of it, and I think it's a tribute to, or a testament really, to the refugees that we brought in, along with other really talented folks in the business. I mean, our business has gone double in terms of our EBITDA. We've doubled the amount of revenue since we had started at that point in time. It's a function of leaning in with folks that have really innovative, thoughtful ways and creative ways in which to solve problems. So this was not just a do-good effort. This is something that's like really genuinely good for business. And from there, Hamdi had founded Tent, which Yaron and the team have been leading that effort.
So tell us a little bit about Tent, because people probably aren't as familiar as they are with the yogurt that they might see in the grocery store.
Yeah, so first off, I want to echo Nishant's thanks for having us, and to Reuters for having us as well. So really based off of the story that you just heard of Chobani successfully hiring hundreds of refugees, in 2016, when the founder and CEO of Chobani, Hamdi Ulukaya, was looking around at the Syrian and Yazidi refugee crisis, looking for what could the business community be doing on this issue, he really found that there was a gap in this space in terms of the role of the private sector in addressing the global refugee crisis, and really wanted other companies to similarly follow in Chobani's footsteps in hiring refugees into their workforce, given the wonderful talent base that they could be for companies. And so that's when he started Tent in 2016 with this mission of mobilizing the business community to connect refugees to work worldwide. And just a few years later, we now manage a partnership of more than 350 large companies like Amazon, Hilton, Pfizer, and others that are committed to hiring, training, and mentoring refugees, both here in the United States, but also globally as well in places like Europe and Latin America too. And Tent provides our member companies with the resources and guidance that they need to set up effective programs to hire, train, and mentor refugees. So it's not just about taking the business case that Nishant mentioned around the high retention rates and the value that refugees were bringing to the business, but it's also taking all of those learnings. So how can we share out best practices with companies on refugee integration? How can we connect them to really wonderful local implementing partners that can help them source refugee talent? And how can we train them on best practices for refugee integration, really with the vision of making it easier for companies to step up on this issue? And I think Hamdi's been really proud of the work that we've done over the past few years to accomplish that goal.
And I know that you're also, Welcome US is right in there, literally when people arrive. Tell me a little bit how you're part of this entire process.
Sure. So when we launched 2 years ago, we really saw ourselves as part of an experiment of the American spirit, if you will, where we set out to reimagine refugee resettlement as a whole of society response, so going beyond just the government responsibility. And that meant asking non-traditional stakeholders, that's our communities, the individual people who make up our communities across the country, the civic organizations that are at the heart of those communities, and of course the businesses, the private sector that fuels everyday life in those communities. And to get directly involved in welcoming newcomers and helping them resettle in the communities, become the new neighbors, and integrate and thrive much more quickly. And what we learned very quickly in less than 2 years is that communities are far ahead of their governments in providing solutions and providing them at scale, which is where the private sector has been key. And doing that in a sustainable way, and even for a challenge that is as large and daunting as the global displacement crisis, where right now more than 110 million people around the world have lost their homes and are seeking safety and refuge. And our American communities are so far ahead, Lauren, that in just 18 months, Americans have signed up to privately sponsor more refugees and help them find safety here in the US than the entirety of the US government was able to support in the last 20 years.
I literally just got goosebumps from that number. That is astounding. I hope you don't mind my asking about your own story, because I know that you are someone who came here via being a refugee from a country. And imagine if you had had the system that we have today for your parents.
Yeah, my family became refugees and then asylees when I was in grade school at 7 years old. And watching my parents begin again, we were resettled by the UN in Toronto, in Canada. And Canada is very fortunate to be a little bit ahead of us in the sponsorship journey and in providing that wraparound community support for a lot of newcomers. But 30 years ago, when we were setting out on this journey, it really was the people who in the community who were willing to take a chance on my father, a diplomat who was starting over again in a minimum pay job at a Tower Records, it doesn't exist anymore, but Tower Records warehouse, stocking the shelves. He didn't speak much English. He didn't have the credentials and the expertise of some Canadian peers, but they provided that support. They provided the opportunity. But thinking about the work that Chobani Tent Welcome is doing now, and really scaling that, and really helping people understand that this is a way to enrich our communities. The people who are doing this work get as much out of it as the newcomers who are being supported. If that had existed, the possibility of what not only my family, but the millions of other families who've been on this journey could have achieved and given back even faster is really remarkable. And it's very exciting to see, that shift in thinking really happening now, and the private sector really not just stopping at writing the big checks. And don't get me wrong, everybody should write the big checks. My head of development is standing right over there, and she'll never speak to me again if I don't make that point. The big checks are great. We need the funding. But the innovation and ingenuity of the private sector, of the creativity and skills of their workforce, making that available to finding solutions to this challenge, it's what's been a game changer.
Yaron, tell me a little bit about what that innovation, the genius is behind all of this.
Yeah, so I really love what Monna was just sharing about kind of the long-term impact that the business community can have in supporting refugees. And Hamdi has a saying that once a refugee has a job, they're no longer a refugee, which I really think speaks to the power of a job, both in being able to financially support refugees themselves and their families, but also helping them build bonds in their new community. And so I think as we think about the way that the business community can get involved in this issue, hiring becomes paramount as we're having these conversations. And I think the reason we can talk about the benefits to refugees, but I think one point that I really want to make is that hiring refugees is a win-win for businesses and refugees.
Because we have a labor shortage in this country.
Exactly. Right. And refugees are proven to have higher retention rates than the average employee, which we found through research that we did with the Fiscal Policy Institute. We found that more American consumers are more likely to buy products from a company that agreed to hire refugees, from research that we did with New York University. And so we see that there's real tangible business benefits for a company hiring refugees. So as we have this conversation about supporting refugees at scale, Tent does a really wonderful job of making the business case to companies about the business benefits of hiring refugees, and then being able to support them with the resources, guidance, and trainings they need to do this at scale as well throughout the country.
What have you learned in the process in terms of scaling up? Because I imagine you've made some mistakes along the way. We don't come into everything perfect. Where do you think you've learned, and how has that iterated?
So, I mean, just building off of the points that were said earlier, we've had about 30% of our workforce is immigrants and refugees, and thankfully they've been able to change their status. And then since then, we've doubled down on our efforts and said we're going to go and hire 200 more refugees into the business. And building off of the learnings of what we did previously, we had heard from the community, just as Yaron had said, that the moment that a refugee gets a job is the moment that they're no longer considered a refugee. We heard that feedback loud and clear, so that they didn't know this one individual to have come from Burma or some other country across the world, but that they actually were now playing a role in which they were contributing to society, and they're known as the person that either works at Chobani or is their local barista and whatnot. I think to build off of our learnings from there, we said, let's take it to the next level. Let's think about how we can start to think about innovation in our own products. So we actually launched a product in partnership with an initiative called Unstuck. And Unstuck, what it is a number of Venezuelan refugees that have migrated into Colombia. We went out and identified what are those farms, what are those co-ops that we can go and source that mango and passion fruit from. And it's now the highest repeat 4-pack that we actually have in the entire Chobani system today, which is unbelievable, right? That innovation was inspired by wanting to go and get refugees jobs, but it was also led to like a really good business decision for us with it being that high repeat item.
Oh, now I'm craving mangoes and passion fruit. Can anyone be a sponsor?
Yeah, anyone who is a legal resident or citizen can be a sponsor, and truly, it's everyone, people from across the country, from all kinds of political backgrounds, faith backgrounds. It's a whole of society response that is doing this work. We have had in less than 2 years more than 2 million Americans put up their hand to be sponsors and provide that direct support to refugees in need. And just building off on a point that Nishant just made, we have learned that when people have that experience, that direct interaction and participation with the work, it goes so far beyond political divides, differences in ideology, differences in culture. It's that human one-to-one interaction. And once you've had that experience, you're very likely to continue to be involved and be a repeat sponsor, be a repeat volunteer. And it's really had this larger ripple effect of bringing communities together, healing divides, and what has been a very tumultuous time for our country for all the reasons that we are aware of. And working towards this shared goal of being a good neighbor, a good friend, a guide. We often say, you have all the knowledge that you need to be a sponsor. All you need is knowledge about life in your community and the time to share that, to just do that neighborly act. So it's really accessible to everyone, regardless of where you are in the country.
I would just to also, I love that we're building off each other's points here in the
Makes
conversation.
my job easy.
The other piece, as you think about integration back into society and community and so forth, I'm personally a military veteran. And there's something about the mentorship aspect of things that's been highly effective. We're coming up on Veterans Day on Saturday, this coming Saturday, and I think about the number of refugees that have come in that are part of that are Afghan translators for us, that are now in this country, and they've been wanting to make themselves adopt back into society or adopt into society. Now, business, one of the learnings to your earlier question that we had is how do we now get more of the diaspora to come in and really get fully adopted by different businesses. And so Tent had launched an initiative around Afghan refugees, along with, I think, Hispanic, if I'm not mistaken, and women
Yeah, we've launched 4 mentorship programs for different refugee populations in the United States that we feel need additional support to economically integrate. So Afghan refugees, refugee women, Hispanic refugees, and LGBTQ refugees. And I think the Afghan program that Nishant is mentioning is such a powerful example because you have veterans at companies who are looking for ways to support Afghan refugees who come to the United States with incredible skills and experience. And so veterans serving in a mentorship program, working one-on-one with an Afghan mentee to help them advance in their career can really go a long way in helping somebody advance professionally. And we now have over 60 companies in our 4 mentorship programs who've collectively committed to mentoring over 4,000 refugees from those 4 communities in the US over the next few years.
Can you talk a little bit about the ripple effect, too, of bringing refugees into your communities, supporting them, and then what it means for their families and for the broader community?
Well, I guess I'll start for Chobani. You know, we have, like I was saying, we have hundreds and hundreds of refugees that are now in the system. Getting them adopted and assimilated and whatnot into the community. One, it starts obviously with the mentorship. The biggest barrier that I've seen has been on the language side of things. In our plant today, we have about 20 plus languages that are spoken, which is pretty amazing. But how does that now translate beyond the plant? How does that translate within the community itself? And I think there's been a lot of trainings that we've been offering to our workers as well as the employees. Previously, it was through translators. Now we're using the power of technology. There's a partnership with an organization called NGen. So I think that's been helping a great deal with these overall assimilation. And I think in general, there's a human level of relativity here, right? That I think we were discussing earlier, just that allows for folks to get further integrated into their local communities.
And what are some of the other challenges that you've identified and you're working on now?
Yeah, I would say 2 of the biggest challenges that refugees face when integrating into their new communities are language barriers and transportation barriers. So many refugees arrive with limited English language proficiency, and so we need employers like Chobani and others to step up who can create welcoming environments for those who speak English at a more limited level, and also transportation barriers. Many of them don't have cars or driver's licenses when arriving in the United States. And so a lot of what we've been doing over the past few years is actually investing in training for companies on how to address these really core challenges refugees face when integrating into the workforce. So we worked with Jobs for the Future to develop a guidebook for companies on how to integrate a refugee with limited English language proficiency, investing in solutions like NGen, but also changing signage at companies, creating buddy and mentorship programs internally within the company, and so really offering this suite of best practices so that we can scale refugee hiring and that businesses know that there are resources like Tent and other organizations that can help them really effectively integrate refugees into their workforce.
What do you think our duty is as Americans to refugees who come to this country?
I think in the simplest way to answer that is to do what is core to being an American, and that's to be a good neighbor. You know, to be there, to lend a helping hand. This is something that is happening organically in our communities every day. People see someone who is new to their city or town or neighborhood and, you know, needs a helping hand, and they show up. And remarkably, the story that we hear over and over again from the sponsors that we work with is that once they decided to do this, they didn't even know the help that they needed, and people just kept showing up. They didn't have to ask. You know, people in their community, people in their extended network, you know, people that they worked with, once they heard that they were doing this, they showed up. They showed up with the diapers, with the home furnishings, with, you know, volunteering to drive people to appointments. And it really is just living that core American value of being a good neighbor, showing up, lending a helping hand, and watching that ripple effect grow to the question you were asking earlier. You know, once a refugee is able to integrate, to gain that, you know, financial independence, gain that independence overall, it has a generational effect. You know, I'm sitting here right now today with you because my parents took that risk but had the support and opportunity to, you know, build a life in Canada and then here in the United States. And you know, I hold a senior position in an organization like Welcome. I do a pretty good job of speaking the language, you know, much more fluently than they do, and you know, building that opportunity at a level and scale that they were never able to do in their professional lives, and that will continue to have a ripple effect, hopefully, in my family for many generations to come. But it starts with that, building that foundation day one with those first newcomers, and then watching that grow. And I think, that is an obligation that we have that is very selfish. In the long run, it serves American society and American communities in a way that has profound generational effects as well.
I love that. I feel like it's a great way to end this. I want to thank you, Monna. I want to thank you, Yaron. Nishant, it was so nice to meet you. I am Lauren Young. This is Reuters Next.